come. Pretty sure you made it in the video there. Hey, Charlie, look, you're on video. A lot of people ask about you and your spoiled life. So here is Charlie's appearance for the day. So Charlie's already had a nice long hour walk today. He'll probably get a couple more walks and lots of lounge time throughout the day. So anyway, there's Charlie's appearance. Go ahead, go take another nap. Enjoy your tough life. Okay, so here we are, continuing from where we left off. And come on, computer. Come on, computer. I need a new computer. I think it's about to die. And you got a nice blank screen to look at. Oh, there we go. I taught you about Harry Truman last week in the Cold War. I think if you watched the lectures that we did, you went through Quizlet, you took that quiz, you should be okay with a few of these main ideas about Harry Truman. If you have any questions over the guy, please ask. I read this nice, 1,000-page book over him a couple years ago, and he's really a fascinating president, and kind of his post-presidency is also interesting. But I'm thinking that you should know something with Harry Truman and civil rights. He does a landmark act for civil rights. He integrates the military. So just kind of understand that the civil rights movement is gaining some momentum, but Harry Truman, a Democrat, when doing this, he's going to start to flip the political parties, where the old Southern Democrats are going to start to leave. In fact, when he ran in 1948, the Southern Democrats left and formed the so-called Dixiecrats under Strom Thurmond. Remember his fair deal? He wants a continuation of the New Deal. Did it work? No. Most of this was gutted by Congress. And remember, he's dealing with the Red Scare. The Red Scare will continue throughout the 1950s. But he's kind of president during those HUAC proceedings, the loyalty oaths, and all that escalating fear and paranoia that we had. As for Cold War, I gave you the memory aid. Some of you did a great job in writing that out on the quiz that you submitted yesterday. Truman's muscles brought nasty China across Korea. Some of you just wrote that, and I didn't really give you any credit for it. But you should be able to explain what each of those means. And again, why am I emphasizing this? Because this information does carry over. Your eventual essay, your final, it can include Harry Truman, it can include World War II, it can even go back to that third 9 weeks. So let me know if you got any questions on Truman. Moving forward to the 1950s, we're going to be looking at 1950s society today, which should be pretty interesting for you. If we're examining 1950s society, just kind of think that a lot of the pictures, a lot of this stuff about 1950s society does not necessarily reflect all of America. We see a lot of white middle-class suburbia sitting around their new televisions. Generally, the storyline is mom stays home, cooks and cleans, dad works, comes home at 5 o'clock, puts the briefcase down on the table, mom has dinner ready. The kids may have gotten into a little bit of mischief, but all of that was resolved by the end of the day. This, of course, is reinforced with all of the TV shows that were out there in the 1950s. And you can kind of see a dominant theme. This, the title, kind of explains a lot. Father knows best. In fact, I've got a really fascinating 6-minute clip from one of the episodes of Father Knows Best, where it's going to tell you a lot about gender roles in the 1950s. You may have seen bits and pieces of a few of these shows, but again, look at the people. This is white middle-class suburbia that's depicted on TV. As for television, holy cow, look at that. In 1946, there were 7,000 TV sets. In 1950, that's 50 million TV sets. So they basically say by the end of the decade, every single family has a TV. We're talking like old school TVs. Has no remote control. That's 3 channels. And everyone's going to sit around and watch that. TV had replaced radio by the 1950s. This guy, Newton Minow, he didn't like TV. He called it a vast wasteland, but the American people did like it. So just understand the impact, the influence of TV is truly significant, really from the 1950s forward. So yeah, lots of people have it in the 1950s. As for kind of a dominant theme, or at least what's presented on television or what's presented in this guy's book, it's this theme of conformity. He writes the man in the gray flannel suit, suggesting that there's a need to conform among everyone. And if you look at the pictures, they're all white, they're all in a gray flannel suit. I guess you got a couple nonconformists in the mix, but for the most part, you have this dominant theme of conformity. So that's one of the questions that I always ask about the 1950s. To what extent is everyone a conformist in the decade? Is it all conformity in the 1950s? Well, based on a few of the things that I've shown you, the TV shows, this picture, you would think, yeah, it is a lot of conformity, but that's not exactly the case. Keep in mind, this is going on in the 1950s. Martin Luther King, civil rights movement, these guys are not conformists. They're in fact breaking the unjust laws of segregation. I've got a whole week devoted to the civil rights movement, but you got to keep in mind as we cover, the, I guess, allegation that it's all conformity in the 1950s, you're going to see that's definitely not the case. There are seeds of rebellion that without a doubt are planted in this decade. So again, I will cover civil rights. I got to lay the foundation with a few other topics, and I'll take a full week to explain the civil rights movement from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. So anyway, these are nonconformists without a doubt in the 1950s. As for teenagers in the 1950s, I would argue these guys are a bit of, rebels, nonconformists. And you may have seen some of these early 1950s greaser looks, like maybe in the movie Grease, but the leather jacket, white t-shirt, cigarette pack rolled up in your sleeve. But this is going to influence teenagers who, for the first time, are like this group with nothing major to do in their lives. And if you go back through time, let's see, 1940s, teenagers, well, they're going to support the war effort, then go off and fight. 1930s, they're dead broke, they're working for their family, and that was kind of the story from, every single decade prior. But now in the 1950s, people are doing well. Kids are in school. And if you put a whole lot of teenagers together without direct parental supervision, some of them might rebel. And they actually choose to embrace and love this look of the rebel, the role of the rebel. This book reinforces it, these movies reinforce it, and sure enough, kids start to rebel in the 1950s. So is that conformity? No, you have some nonconformity with teenagers and their problems that they might get into. We'll look at this in the form of music in a bit. One quick note with these authors. You're going to have a little bit of a D-Cush moment on these authors because the AP test has asked an entire essay question comparing the authors of the 1920s and the 1950s. For us, let's simply note that these authors are critical of conformity in the 1950s. The Beat generation, or as they're called, the Beatniks, they don't like conformity. In fact, Jack Kerouac advocates you go on the road and you find yourself. Allen Ginsberg, he's also a nonconformist writer in the 50s who becomes like a super hippie in the 1960s. You'll see some video clips of him later. But just look, you got the conformist ideal and the nonconformist. And they're going to be kind of button heads throughout the entire decade. So again, thank yourself. You don't have to write a DBQ comparing the lost generation of the 1920s to the beats of the 1950s. That would be fun if your entire college credit were riding on that essay, huh? Anyway, the Beatniks, they don't like society in the 1950s, simply put. You ever see this? You got some of the greasers, I forget what their name is. What is it? The T-Birds or something? But you got the kind of rebel look in the movie Grease. If you've seen it, you've got a pretty good understanding of the different roles throughout the 1950s. So this one exaggerated quite a bit, but I always have a number of students who have at least seen that movie. So you got the greasers and the, poodle skirt look in the 1950s as well, the conformists, you can say. As for gender roles, what are men and women supposed to do? Just looking at these pictures, she's the provider, She's going to provide the food for the kids. He's going to, provide the money for the family. He might be outdoors grilling, and just kind of think that this is defined in a number of ways, which I'll show you in some somewhat controversial video clips that probably would not be, appropriate today, but you'll see those through those links that I'll provide on YouTube in a bit. But look what Life magazine is publishing about women. The ideal modern woman married, cooked, and cared for her family, and kept herself busy by joining the local PTA and leading a group of campfire girls. She entertained guests in her family's suburban house and worked out on the trampoline to keep her size 12 figure. The ideal 1950s man was the provider, protector, and boss of the house. That's Life magazine, the most popular magazine of the 1950s, suggesting that women stay at home, men provider, protector, and boss of the house. That again reinforced on all those television shows, media. Do women like this? Are women going to simply go back to the old, I guess, cult of domesticity, Republican motherhood, stay at home? Because what had they done the previous decade? Were they out of the house? Were they exploring their kind of newfound freedom during World War II by providing, by working, by having independence? Absolutely, that's the case. And you got to understand there are going to be some seeds of rebellion for women in the 1950s, and not all will embrace this homebody lifestyle that's presented on TV and in magazines. In fact, some are going to challenge these gender roles, notably Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was a sex symbol of the 1950s. In fact, if you think about this, or think about the emergence of Playboy, which is in the 1950s featuring Marilyn Monroe, that's not your typical gender role for a woman. In fact, this newfound sexuality of women is being embraced by some and even being published for the masses with Playboy. So you're not supposed to talk about it, think about it, look at any of this stuff in the 1950s, yet it's out there. There's some nonconformity kind of with sexuality throughout the entire decade. And wait till you see the 1960s, or even just, think about what we see modern day. Think about the Super Bowl halftime show. Think about any commercial, watch any movie, any TV, and it's out there everywhere. But this is the emergence of it. We're seeing some rebellion with the stereotypical gender norms of that decade. Now, this guy breaks the mold by actually writing about it. Alfred Kinsey made a movie about him. He writes and researches about sex, and it's published and it's out there, where he's going to like fully detail by interviewing and doing case study after case study that, yeah, that stuff happens. Premarital sex was common, extramarital affairs were frequent among married couples, and this guy again writes all about it. He's going to, let's say, make some waves in 1950s society by writing about this openly, because again, you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. You're not even supposed to, acknowledge it. It's, for the home. You don't even mention it elsewhere. Yet his entire life and research is based upon it. Life magazine, again, the voice of the masses. Kinsey's results are an assault on the family as a basic unit of society, a negation of moral law. Yeah, he's going to be a bit controversial, you could say, but you got to understand that emerging sexuality was out there, and a lot of people will kind of embrace it. Just look at the popularity of Marilyn Monroe, look at the popularity of other figures that kind of embrace this idea throughout the entire decade. As for teenagers, well, here's probably the epitome of it at all. I'm going to play a lot of these video clips for you in the next few clips that I'll add. But you got to see Elvis and his motions, his lyrics, his gyrations, I guess you can say, and think about that in terms of conformity. He's going to totally break the mold. In fact, Elvis is breaking the mold with his form of music, his rock and roll. This was historically African American music. Now, when, say, white middle class suburbia heard it, when Alan Freed, a DJ who played this race music on the radio, when he played that for the masses, holy cow, they loved it. In fact, when Elvis starts to play this, people are fainting in the crowd. They love him. They scream. They're, in absolute love with Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. So I'll play these video clips. I think that'll do a whole lot more than me talking about it. But as we're mentioning music in the 1950s, let's just say that's a pretty big topic. Um, if you're into that thing, just look at these college classes that are out there. You can take an entire college class just on the music of the Beatles. You can take an entire college class, the history of rock music 1, the history of rock music 2. So I'm mentioning this in bits and pieces. We've heard some of the music over the third 9 weeks that we were able to play. But if you're into this, there are college classes that you can take. This is at Indiana University, by the way, as you can see by these links. But anyway, there's a lot out there. Check out the fans. Absolutely loving Elvis. The video clips that I'm about to provide will do a whole lot more than just these still pictures or me talking about it. So you'll need to look at these links. You'll need to hear the music uh, to answer my closing questions today. And again, the closing questions will be turned in by the end of the week. So check the due dates. Let me know if you guys have any questions or concerns, and make sure you look at that new grading criteria, especially for Lone Star College. Thanks. Have a good day. Enjoy your afternoon.